I call the Honourable Shane Jones.
Sir, I will begin my speech by saying karinga whakaroko. Please listen. Number one, it's with some disappointment but some joy that we stand and speak on this bill because, as I said earlier, a number of the elements were started with us. So I don't want to focus, sir, during this third speech on the elements that cause us to be in different camps. I want to draw on a figure that the New Zealand First member put out into the House, and I understand it's sourced from the Price Waterhouse consultation document about the costs of the leaky buildings. And I've checked with an august source of information, who shall remain nameless, that the actual $20 billion figure associated with the leaky homes is verifiable. The figure that I was a tad more familiar with was $11.5 billion, which is frightening enough as it is. So when you add that figure to the $7 or $8 billion that the garden variety Kiwis lost in the finance, the debacle of the finance companies, and then you add the Reserve Bank figure, sir, of 30-odd billion, which is the rebuild costs of Christchurch, then, sir, you're getting up to a figure, arguably, of well in excess of 50 billion. And then you divide that into 190 billion, which is about the size of our GDP, and it gives you an indication of how important, sir, the construction sector, not only from, sir, a carpentry, a design and architecture point of view, but how we fund that activity. Because a lot of the funds, sir, that were squandered in the debacle of the moms and pops, etc., who put their dough into the Mark Hodgins schemes, etc., it did find its way into property development, some of which, sir, is the subject of this bill in the sense that had we had a better level of stewardship, better quality of oversight and better skills, the overall cost might have been smaller. So this is very serious business, sir. To quote Mr. Williams' figure, and I'm told that it can be attested to by looking at the consultant's report, 20-odd billion, the 30 billion that we're talking about coming out of the Reserve Bank, the 7 or 8 billion, sir, associated with the debacle of the finance industry, we are at a figure that is nigh on 25 to 30% of the value of our GDP, and that, sir, is an enormous challenge to us as parliamentarians. So there are aspects, sir, to this legislation that were started in our time, but this is not about authorship. This is about showing how grey the experience has been that we've all lived through, irrespective of whether we were in government, much to our chagrin, you're in government, but it's a reminder, sir, about the level of pain and the burden that has been shouldered by far too many New Zealanders. Of course, sir, there is another problem that we've yet to get our heads around, sir, and that problem is the local government's ability to insure themselves. Now, sir, part of the reason that local governments are shy, and Mr. Williams will know this, local governments are shy about who ought to stand up and bear the costs of the leaky buildings, sir, lies with their own insurance liability. Now, local governments, sir, have their own insurance company, and that company has sought, in even the time when, short but eventful time that I was the minister, to secure reinsurance, sir, from one of the large behemoths of that particular obscure industry, i.e. Lloyd's. Now, sir, they are struggling to do that, and that, sir, actually drives the behaviour of a lot of the consent authorities and the officers working in those consent authorities. So if we do not get, Mr. Minister, the actual balance right, you can understand how their fears about their own inability to get insurance for consent authorities is driving that kind of behaviour. So I have no doubt, in short order, sir, that associated with the role of a consent authority is going to be the challenge that we as a parliament, naturally first line of defence, the government is going to have to deal with. Can local government building consent authorities ensure that their decisions related to building work are themselves insurable? Because rest assured, sir, when in the future problems arise, they're going to go for the builders and the designers and the architects, and they're going to struggle to find suitable insurance as well, because insurance is emerging as a new taniwha, with long fangs about to create all sorts of problems for the garden variety kiwi, make no mistake about that, in this particular sector, then, sir, we need to ensure that the work... Well, there was one taniwha that did annoy me, and it was the one that was stopping the inner city rail loop, which you don't agree with, but we kind of like because it's our signature policy. And the only thing I said about that taniwha was whether or not it was GST registered, but that's another matter. I'm told that that actually cost me votes with my relations in Ngāti Whātua, but that's another matter, that's come and gone. So, sir, naturally, we will not agree to vote for the bill because of, I guess, the piecemeal approach, but a lot of the content, we don't want to be too churlish about it, sir. It does resonate well with us, and we look forward to entering into the debate, hearing the submissions about the number 4 contribution, and hope that there is a level of coherence when all these things come together, sir. The other thing I'd suggest, sir, that the references to housing affordability, are partly related, in our view, sir, to the length of time it might take for a council inspection or the costs associated with a council actually processing the application. But, sir, it also depends on the structure of the industry and whether or not there's enough competitive tension, or whether or not, sir, the mountainous corporate entity known as Fletcher's, with all its tentacles going into concrete, construction and building, whether that in itself represents an absence of competitiveness. And in addition to that, sir, the cost of land. The cost of land has got to such an extent in key parts of New Zealand, and I'm not talking about the blighted areas of Christchurch, sir, we're really talking about our largest urban area, Tāmaki Makaurau. So it's not just fair to look at the building construction costs, it's also important that we look at land. And that's a debate that this House at some point in time is going to have to revisit. To what extent do we go up? And if we go up, sir, as opposed to out in terms of dealing with housing quandaries, then how confident can we be with the quality of the work, the quality of the engineering, and the quality of design, and how affordable it is. So, sir, these things are interconnected, and whoever's got the responsibility on that side of the House to one day deal with these things, they might be surprised to learn that we have a great deal of interest, and we might have some shared interests in that regard. So, sir, it's disappointing that the bill doesn't capture our vote, but we look forward to working on future contributions to the building sector, and I would restate that's the size, sir, of the liability. That's the size of the financial penalty that garden variety kiwis have faced, and dare I say it, sir, also you and us, sir, as taxpayers, because we've ended up being the insurer of last resort in this sense. I say that, sir, not only those of us as taxpayers, but also, sir, as ratepayers. Sir, the point that I would round up on is that local government reform is obviously not over. Now, once, sir, that reform agenda, whichever direction the ministers intend to take it, sir, it's going to be a challenge for each local government authority to maintain a level of confidence and a level of efficiency that gets the investors, the property developers, the people who actually going to have to spend money to redevelop those areas, either to meet the housing needs of Auckland, to redevelop the capital assets, sir, of Christchurch, and we need to be confident, so that when they implement the regulations, because that's where, sir, the power is going to come, and the actual mahi, the actual deed will be done, is when the regulations are passed through this piece of legislation. What types of building activity can be excluded from the process of a building consent? How onerous will the regulations be? And, sir, I would make a plea to the current minister that there is a genuine case here for having a balance between those who don't want to repeat this $50 billion experience, but at the same time, sir, that the pendulum not swing so far that we thwart and we suffocate those who are prepared to take a risk to ensure that the capital assets in the property sector of New Zealand are continually rebuilt. Kia ora tātou katoa.
Mr. Speaker.
I call Paul Goldsmith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I speak in support of the Building Amendment Act number 3, and I think this is another piece of good legislation. And